From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Coming to another Preservation Week here at the Library of Congress. Started in 2009, Preservation Week is a national effort to help inform people about preservation, and the Library of Congress was one of the founding members. This is our Topics in Preservation, the 84th, and I want to just mention the 85th one that will be happening in May, on May 22nd, about broken cylinders. But today's talk is not about anything that's broken. Instead, it gives me great pleasure to finally have Tom Clareson here at the Library of Congress. I've actually been trying to get Tom here to speak on one of his many, many different projects for a number of years, and this year it finally worked out. So I'm extremely pleased about that. Tom's the connector. He connects cultural institutions in such interesting ways, and one of those connections is what you'll hear about today. I've known Tom for 25 years. Is that possible? I don't have gray hair for nothing. And yet Tom doesn't age. So there you go. Tom works for LYRASIS. He's the senior consultant, both for digital and preservation services there. I knew Tom when he started working at Amigos a number of 25 years ago. In 2014, Tom was the recipient of the George Cunha and Susan Schwartzberg Award. And that's an award that recognizes outstanding leadership in collaboration. And it was the perfect award for Tom to get because he collaborates across all cultural heritage institutions, from museums to archives to historical societies and, of course, libraries. So today he's talking about open arms, and I think that really speaks to what he's been doing for a very long time. I was really pleased to hear his a similar talk about this same topic at ALA, and at that time I sort of twisted his arm to come and speak here at the Library of Congress. I couldn't be more pleased to have him, and we have how many people viewing from? We have dozens and dozens of people on the webinar, so I want to welcome all of you as well. So without further ado, Tom.
Well, thank you, Jeannie, and thanks to the Library of Congress for allowing me to come in and talk about both the continuation and the expansion of a couple of programs that I know some of you may be familiar with, but also about the expansion of disaster preparedness and recovery into a new field where many of us in the library, archives, and museum world have not had a chance to work before. So, let's see here. What I'd like to talk with you about today is taking a look at expansion of disaster preparedness and recovery across further boundaries that we have within our field. Oftentimes we talk about the silos that we have between libraries, archives, and museums. And as Jeannie has said, I've been trying to bring that collaboration about between those groups for quite a while. And I've had an opportunity more recently to work with even further groups. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on some programs that have been around for a couple of years, but they are actually expanding quite a bit, and then go into discussion of a brand new program. So new that this is the first time we've shown the logo for the program. So new that the website is not coming up until Monday. So it is really something that we're being able to talk about a little bit of breaking news for. So many of you may be familiar with the Alliance for Response. This is a group that has been working for a number of years to bring the emergency management and response community, those who are always first on the scene, together with our community, together with the cultural heritage community, so that we can actually learn how to speak each other's language. This has been something that has been going on for close to 15 years now, and just continues and continues to expand. So it started out with the idea of building cooperative networks, the idea of having people get a chance to talk before the disaster happens and introduce each other, be introduced to each other before they have to meet outside of a burning or flooding building. One of the more interesting things, and I'll talk about this event in just a few minutes, was that I had an opportunity to work with folks in the Mississippi Gulf Coast last year, around April of last year. Actually, I think it might have been this same week. And we did our session for the Alliance for Response. And the next morning, the speakers who did not leave that night actually had to find different ways to the airport because there was flooding along the roads. There had been trees that had been blown down and knocked down. So we actually saw people who were utilizing things that they talked about and learned about at the Alliance for Response meeting the very next day to make sure that they were safe and their collections were safe. The goals, there are a number of goals of the Alliance for Response that are out there, but the ones that we sort of held as closely to as possible for a number of years is this idea of relationship building. It might be trading business cards at first. It might be even knowing where the closest emergency management county office is, or which is the closest fire station to your building, and to start off with that. To educate cultural heritage and emergency management professionals and sort of vice versa. You know, I always take a look at some of the things with the incident command system and many of the other pieces that the emergency management world uses. And oftentimes I figure we've got an 18-page book of acronyms that I've got to memorize before I'm able to work with these folks. The same thing's happening with them. They probably are not as familiar with some of the care that needs to happen to our types of materials when they're normally looking at caring for businesses or caring for houses, and maybe not as familiar with collections. So that communication is very important. And then sustainability. These ideas of strong, ongoing networks that are continuing on to allow people to be educated, to allow people to continue to work together for as long as possible. So a wide variety of goals. We started out in 2003, the winter of November, December of 2003, with just a couple of locations, Boston, Dallas, and I was able to work with the Cincinnati Art Museum to host one of the Alliance for Response conferences there. A number of years later, we have 28 of these organizations, and they can be in a city or a municipal area. They can also be in a county or a region. Most recently, along with the Mississippi Gulf Coast Alliance for Response, we have started to work with Albany and what's called the Capital Region up in New York. So they are really all over the place. You'll see there's a few states missing in the middle of the country there where we would definitely like to get more organizations started. But this is something that has been growing for years and been very active for years. Now, the Alliance for Response was an organization that was started by heritage preservation. And heritage preservation for a number of years was an organization that provided advocacy for preservation, conservation, did a lot of educational programs. When that organization finally shut down in 2015, in May of 2015, one of the most wonderful things that I have seen in my professional life happened, which was that the Foundation for the American Institute for Conservation was actually able to come in and be able to support many of the programs that had been started by heritage preservation. They've been able to support them, they've been able to streamline them, and in many cases even expand them. So it was a case where the baton was passed and the pace was picked up, and it has been a very good continuation of a lot of projects. There are a couple of things that you can do to find out more about what are the activities that are going on all over the country with Alliance for Response. You can see that we have the website here, and that certainly has a lot of sort of feature stories about trends that are going on around the country as far as disaster preparedness and recovery are concerned. But the other thing is, the thing that I like the most is the fact that we have this opportunity to sort of delve in and see what each network is doing. And it's actually a great crib sheet. It's a great Cliff Notes, because you can say, well, we've sort of had the same events going on with our alliance for a while. What are they doing in San Diego? What are they doing in other parts of the country? So it's a way to sort of refresh our curriculum for what's happening with the Alliance for Response activities. So there have been plenty of successes. I didn't want to have 5 or 6 slides on this. I tried to boil it down to 1 slide, but we have had some of the groups that have been around for quite a long time, like Atlanta, establishing a listserv that includes emergency responders. And I've been parts of alliances where we've had 1 or 2 emergency responders on them, but this is one where there is great give and take that work with the emergency responders quite a bit. Now, I'm not sure how they're handling the parts of the road that are falling apart down in Atlanta, but I know that that is something that is certainly causing havoc for the arts and culture community, so that may be something that they are going to have to deal with. Boston, which has been around since 2003, got a hazard mitigation grant that was awarded by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, but also Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, to provide training at the community level. So they were actually doing quite a bit of training on incident command system and other areas. Galveston and Houston, that have worked together for a long time, had a disaster planning webinar to try to get as many people in their offices working on disaster plans, and has also held some incident command system training. And then New York is one of the places where this model has actually worked the best, and unfortunately it was because of a bad situation. They worked with the Office of Emergency Management of New York in conference calls to get updates on what the city was doing during Hurricane Irene and Hurricane Sandy, and then the Alliance for Response got a grant from the New York Community Trust to train heritage responders, to develop a website and identification and inventory information, to provide social media feeds, and document, map, and try to figure out where the damage to the cultural community was. So it was really interesting to see all of the activities that this group has done. Currently, another group that is active, quite active every year, is the Denver Alliance for Response, because of the wildfires that are happening in Colorado. So they have folks from the forestry areas, emergency management, and the cultural heritage institutions working together. So many, many successes for the Alliance for Response program. I also wanted to talk, and there are a number of people who are in the room that are part of this, about the National Heritage Responders Program. And this is a program that has come from the American Institute for Conservation as well, and it actually is one where there are a couple of components to it. One of the major components is being on the end of that phone line that we just saw in boldface, and having people who can be online or on the phone to talk you through a disaster that might happen at your individual institution. Is there part of your collection that may have been damaged in some way? Is there a concern because your building is not providing the envelope it could or should to protect the collections? So we have that level of discussion that can happen, and I know that Jeannie Drews has done a number of tours of duty on the phone during that, and Andrew Robb as well. Many of you in this room have helped on the National Heritage Responders side of things. This group has been active again for close to 10 years. It started as a result of the Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita in 2005. people felt that there was a need to have a network of responders around the country. And so in 2007 and again in 2011, there was training that was made available. Very advanced training, actually on-site training, going through complete aspects of a mock disaster in an organization, and figuring out all of the activities that could be used for a variety of format of materials. But also the other thing that was really quite interesting for me as one of the trainees was the level of documentation that they asked us to put together in this training. So between those two trainings, between the 2007 and 2011 training sessions, the first of which was sponsored by IMLS, they actually have trained over 100 people. I think it's about 107 folks who are trained at this point to be able to respond to these types of disasters. Like I said, this can be done over the phone. But the other thing is that the group can be deployed. Small groups or small teams of people can be deployed to a number of locations around the country. So when we have a region-wide disaster, when we have situations like the floods that occurred in North Dakota and seem to happen on an almost annual basis there, the earthquake in Haiti, a number of situations like Superstorm Sandy and other hurricanes, there is the ability to get people on site and get people who know and know conservation and who have been trained in how to deal with this type of activity, who have been trained to document, who have been trained how to communicate. So this is a really important collaborative team that I hope we don't have the opportunities to use much, but I know that we will. So it's an important backing team that is there. But what I'm really here to talk about, in addition to talking with you about the safety net that's out there through the Alliance for Response and National Heritage Responders, is what's happening in the arts community. There have been a variety of situations that we've had to think about and talk about in the arts community. This is actually on campus at the University of Iowa. Some of the flooding that they have had, again, a state that has very regular schedules, unfortunately, of flooding, where they have to deal with this type of situation. And this was the Performing Arts Center there getting damaged. One of the things that has been, I think, the most disheartening, but also one of the biggest call to arms, was the ghost ship fire that happened in December of 2016, where an arts collective in the Oakland, California area burned, and there were 36 people who passed away in that fire. And one of the things that we're looking at is, we look at this all the time, is the human safety, the human aspect of trying to make sure before anything else that the staff, the patrons, the guests, the audience is safe. So we need to think about floods, we need to think about fire, but we also need to think about things that are as seemingly mundane as digital disasters as well. And with the activities that we do in the library world, we certainly have digital collections that can be damaged. But one of the things that we have learned when we've been working with the performing arts community is the level of concern about the ticket lists, the seating lists, information about productions, etc., that are online, and the fact that we need to make sure that those are saved as well. So we're looking at a wide variety of disasters. And one of the things that the folks in the emergency management community talk about all the time is all hazards types of disaster preparedness and recovery. And we want this to be all hazards, not just thinking about natural hazards, man-made hazards, but also mechanical hazards as well. These digital disasters can be really a difficult situation for an organization too. So we're trying to cover all of these areas. So we had an opportunity to talk in the fall of 2015 with a group of the leaders on a regional and national basis in the performing arts world. And the Mellon Foundation brought a number of organizations that were leaders in the preservation and conservation regional community together with their counterparts in the performing arts community. And one of the things that we heard was that there were, in a lot of cases, there were collections, but there were also a lot of other things that we had to think about when we were thinking about working with and responding along with performing arts organizations. So after a disaster, think about the kind of things that might happen. Think about, and this was a situation that definitely happened in 2001 when Tropical Storm Allison sat over Houston and dumped 21 inches of rain over 3 days, and part of it was on a theater complex there. What will happen to the building and venue? Could it be collapsed walls? What will happen to the sets? What will happen to the costumes, which may be something that is stored for a long time by the organization, or maybe something that is traveling along with the presenting group. The records, the business records, the tickets records are important as well. The concern that we heard from the performing arts community, though, the biggest thing that they asked us to look at was the loss of business, the fact that if they had a disaster, if they had a fire, the doors were going to be shut and that performance could not go on, and recovering from lost revenue. So what was an area of interest that they were wanting to see if it could be provided was continuity of operations and continuity of business assistance and training, and disaster preparedness assistance and training as well. In 2016, in the beginning of 2016, my organization, LYRASIS, received a 6-month Andrew W. Mellon Foundation planning grant. And there were 5 preservation and conservation organizations and 4 performing arts organizations that worked together on this grant. We reviewed existing surveys, existing research that had been done on this topic. And one of the things that we found, which was a concern, was there wasn't a lot that was out there. There were not some of the longitudinal surveys that some states have been doing. There were not the kind of studies that had come through the IMLS Connecting to Collections program or the National Endowment for the Humanities Field Services programs that are out there, that are taking the temperature of what disaster planning has been going on for years in the field. So there were not as many of those. But there were new surveys. There's an annual survey done by one of the leader groups in the field called the National Performance Network, or NPN, and they had been doing a couple of different surveys really every year to take a look at what their members around the country were seeing as far as the need for disaster preparedness and planning. And we looked at that research. We also did some of our own research. We went to New Orleans and talked with a group at NPN's headquarters. In Red Bank, New Jersey, we were at the Count Basie Theater between 2 performances that I wish I had been able to go to, but I was able to lead the focus group there. The New Jersey State Council on the Arts, which is really a leader as far as one of the statewide organizations that is out there focusing on the arts, was able to provide a situation for us to talk there. In Austin, Texas, I walked into the middle of a construction zone where the Dance U.S.A. conference was being held, and we talked over jackhammers and a lot of other construction noise and debris about the kind of things that we needed to look at as far as working with the dance community and other parts of the performing arts community. And then we were able to actually get a virtual focus group as well. Another thing that we did was looked at the disaster preparedness tools that are out and available for both the cultural heritage community and for the performing arts community, and do some comparisons. What did they cover? Where were they missing things? Where were the blanks that they were having? What we found through the survey research that we looked at was that a majority of performing arts organizations did not have disaster plans, and even fewer had continuity of operations plans. Planning really is not an institutional priority. They have to get the show going on for the next period. They have to think about other shows that are coming up. They need to think about actually a lot of day-to-day work, and they need to, their collections in some cases, their collections can be the performers who are coming together as a troupe to present something, and so the planning might not be as much of a institutional priority. They don't have the time or expertise to do this, and they may have small staffs. We talked, especially at the Dance USA conference, I talked with a number of organizations with a staff size of 1 or 1.5 people. So that was difficult to think about. One of the things that I was very pleased about, though, that I couldn't believe it the first time I heard it at one of the focus groups, and I had to ask at everyone after that, was what's happening with your electronic records? And many of the organizations were saying that they are stored, as well as being backed up on site, they're stored off site, they're stored in the cloud. They were thinking of some levels of digital preservation or digital disaster planning so that they were not completely crippled by a situation where their records might be taken out by a storm or other problems. So just very quickly, taking a quick look at the NPN information, the majority of the partners didn't have an emergency plan, and it wasn't an institutional priority. Some groups were unaware of the need for a plan, didn't have the time to do it, didn't have the expertise, or said that they couldn't afford to develop a plan. That became a really important part of the grant project that we are working on now, to try to make some level of infrastructure for planning available to these organizations without a huge charge, without a cost to them, and in some cases without a monetary cost to them, but also looking at trying to take the stress of the personnel cost a little bit off of them as well. We worked with organizations that were both producing and presenting organizations. And the difference here is that the producing organizations may be the group that creates and stages some of the work, where the presenting organizations may be theaters that bring in works that are produced by others, works that are created by others. But we also found that there are a lot of organizations that serve in both of these types of activities. We work with organizations with and without facilities. And I think one of the things that really gave me the biggest shock when I was talking with one of the focus groups was an organization that said they regularly perform at 6 different institutions, 6 different buildings a year. And they said, we don't know anything about those institutions. We don't know their disaster plans. If they have a disaster plan, we had to walk around and figure out where the entries and exits were. We had to walk around to figure out where the fire extinguishers were, or if there's even a fire suppression system at all. They're walking into these situations, and it's a concern because they don't know even the first level of safety activities related to these. So the organizations without facilities really made their voices known to us as needing some help. Can you help us put together a checklist on what we should hope and expect that our host organizations will provide us in the future? Their definition of a disaster, a little bit different than we might have at the Library of Congress, National Archives, or the Smithsonian Museums. It's, in some cases, yes, a disruption of business is something that all of us are concerned about, but a forced performance cancellation. Is this a situation where you had a performance on the books, it's been on the books for 9 months or a year, and because of this disaster, you've had to cancel it? And then what can the financial repercussions be? When we talked to the few organizations that came to the focus groups that did have disaster plans, what they said was that the plans that they had were focused on just a couple of things: human safety, getting people out, evacuating folks, and communications. Communications on what the staff, what the next artist who was due in should do because the building was damaged. Few had the actual continuity of operations and continuity of business plans. It was mainly some of the quick communications that could happen. What they said they needed was information on resources and best practices for both planning for and recovery from disasters. Few have had any type of disaster training, and that is one of the things that's really important within this program that we're developing to make sure these organizations get. So they were interested in preparedness and recovery training, both being able to put the plans together, and then after the incident does happen, what can they do? Working with existing networks in performing arts and cultural heritage. So working with some of the 28 groups that were out there from the Alliance for Response. Working with organizations like Culture Aid in New York, which is more with the performing and visual arts type of background. And then another thing that, again, was interesting to me, and this was the part that I really appreciated the most, I think, out of any of the focus groups that we did. At the Count Basie Theater, we had people coming up and saying, all right, our performing arts organization is going to have next year its 75th anniversary. And what we have with our programs, with our performance histories, our photographs, our business records, is that they are, one organization said they're in tubs under the bed of the various different board of directors members spread all over town or all over the county. Or they might be in the basement as well. And so we said, what can we do? How can we think about this idea of archiving organizational history, production records, history, programs, photographs, etc. So what has come of this is we had our planning grant January through June of 2016, and then took some time to put together an implementation grant that was awarded last December. This is called the Performing Arts Readiness Project, and it started in January of 2017. It's a 3-year project funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and one of the best things that we did right off the bat with this grant was that we were able to even the sides up, even the discussion up, and bring the Performing Arts Alliance, or PAA, into the project. And the Performing Arts Alliance is actually a group, an alliance of associations and groups that already deal with performing arts disciplines. And so this was a group that had a very wide reach, a national reach, and across the field reach. So you'll see a wide variety of organizations here, and I wanted to talk about each of them, and just in case you can't read all of them, give you a minor background on all of them. Of course, my organization, LYRASIS, there is a project, a program called Arts Ready that comes out of South Arts, which is one of the regional performing arts group. And so Arts Ready is actually a disaster planning tool that has been around for a number of years, and that these organizations have used and become members of to do disaster planning. The Conservation Center in Philadelphia is another member. The Midwest Art Conservation Center in Minneapolis. We have the National Performance Network, based in New Orleans, but members around the country. Each state that is represented on our webinar, and many of the states that you work closely with, has an arts council, and the New Jersey State Council on the Arts actually was brought to my attention because they were the first performing arts group to join with and work with and be on the steering committee of an Alliance for Response. When the New Jersey Alliance for Response, NJCAR, the New Jersey Cultural Alliance for Response, started 3 or 4 years ago, they actually had a performing arts organization at the table, and it was the State Council on the Arts. So we asked one of their lead people to be a member of our partner group as well. Northeast Document Conservation Center, or NEDCC, is another group. We are funded, as I said, by the Mellon Foundation. We work with WESTPAST, the Western States and Territories Preservation Advisory Service, which is more of a virtual preservation service than a bricks and mortar regional group. They do a lot of training, education, and response in the western part of the U.S., and then the Performing Arts Alliance. So we have a really wide variety and an excellent variety of groups to work with here. So this is a huge grant. We wanted to try to do as many things as we possibly could to help this community. We may have gone a little bit overboard, but I think we're finding strengths within all of the organizations that we're working with in order to be able to do this. As I said before, really important aspect to bracket this, working with producing and presenting organizations, not just one or the other, working with organizations with and without facilities. But we're doing a lot of outreach, community engagement, sort of getting people to think about the need for disaster planning. We're providing information resources, the good things that are out there already, and the things like those checklists that people might be talking about if they are doing activities in buildings that they are not usually housed in. Training and conference programming, templates and tools, and this is going to be one of the bigger aspects of what comes out of this program, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. One of my favorites, and actually I want you all to think about, is this something that should happen in the district, is a circuit rider project. And then we're actually going to be able to give grants, sub-grants, for disaster networks and for disaster planning. So I'm going to talk and provide just a few details on each of these so you can see the breadth of the program. The outreach and community engagement, we're doing conference presentations all over the country. The first time I took a look at the list of conferences that are out there for the performing arts community, I wasn't familiar with any of the organizations. And I said, oh, I have to get educated on this really quickly. There are about 30 conferences that are out there, probably more, that happen. This is on a regional and national basis, not just the state basis. And so we're looking at where can we meet and work with some of these associations at their conferences, and especially working with some of the regional groups like South Arts and NPN has been good. Meeting with key stakeholders, just opportunities to talk with a number of performing arts groups in key cities. I was attending a conference by the Pennsylvania Governor's Office of Homeland Security on large event security and large event disaster planning, and had an opportunity just a week before that was put together to start working with the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council, who pulled together some of their key players and brought them together the day before so we could talk about how this program could work well in Pittsburgh. So it was interesting to see that type of planning going on, and we hope to continue that in as many cities and counties as possible. Trusted information resources, as I mentioned, links to existing resources and creating things that are new for the field. And I will sort of do a little bit of promotion here. We have a website coming in early May, hopefully next week, that is going to talk a little bit more about our program, provide links to a wide variety of things that are already out there, but is also going to give you both some background on what happened during our planning project and a future forecast of the kind of activities that we'll be doing during the rest of the project. We have a variety of workshops. In May or June, we're going to start offering on a monthly basis, and in some cases bi-monthly basis, an introduction to emergency preparedness webinar. What are some of the key things that performing arts organizations would need to know? What are some of the key resources? So that's starting soon. And then we're going to branch out and do a series of 2-hour or 4-hour in-depth webinars and some in-person classes. And actually, the steering committee, our group, our partner group, has said we would much rather get out there and do as many of these in-person classes as we possibly can. We like to do the webinars, but it has been so good through the focus groups and through some of the presentations that we've done already to see the level of interest that is out there that we would like to do as many of these in person as possible. So we're going to look at some of the topics that you might think of in disaster planning. Risk assessment and mitigation. What is the possibility of this risk causing damage to this performing arts organization? Basics of business continuity plans, disaster response, mutual support networks. How can some of the performing arts groups take advantage of the networks that are already out there? Venue safety and security. This is the hot topic. We can't get this class ready fast enough. And in fact, we're actually working with a number of conferences where they said, even if you come here and do 45 or 50 minutes on venue safety and security, we want you to come to our 2017 conferences and put together a program fast for us. What they're concerned about is active shooters. What they're concerned about is situations that might cause concern for the audience and the performers while they are on stage or while they are doing some type of activity. So that venue safety and security is very important. Health and human safety. And then community recovery assistance. Actually, when I was first starting to talk about this, I was saying safe havens, the idea that we would have safe havens for people. And they said, oh, maybe it would be a little bit better to talk about it in different terminology and sort of a wider perspective. What we're looking at, and this is something that also drew my eye to New Jersey, and this is, they have a model there that is really amazing. Both the libraries, and many of you might have heard of a conference that was called Ports in the Storm, where they talked about the libraries being areas where people could gather, where FEMA staff could gather, where there were FEMA meetings held. That was really important. And we were at a statewide meeting in New Jersey talking about how great this program was, and all of the folks who were there from the performing arts organization said, Well, we've been doing the same things too. We have been having FEMA meetings in our lobbies. We have been letting people come in and use every single electric plug in our whole facility, because we've had our, oftentimes they have gotten their power restored quickly, to charge their cell phones. We use this as meeting spots. We use these as spots to talk about what needs to be done as far as community planning, community meetings with FEMA. So building these community recovery assistance networks is going to be important as well. And then the last topic here is one that we learned of and probably would not have thought of at all if we hadn't had those focus groups, with the archiving and records retention. I had an opportunity to work in New Jersey end of November, beginning of December last year, with the State Council on the Arts, and we had full day in-person classes, and actually using a performing arts term, at least one of them was standing room only, and we were able to talk with about 60 or 70 different organizations about basics in disaster planning, and it was very well received. A lot of continuing conversation for that. And again, the need for the classes to address traveling organizations without a facility is important as well. We want to look at some of the disaster planning tools that we surveyed when we were doing our research, and think about what can be done with those tools as we go forward. So many of you might be familiar with the PREP tool, the Pocket Response Plan. Two sides of a sheet of paper, and it gives you some contact information and then initial steps to take. And it can include floor plans and include other information about your building. Can that be utilized for the performing arts? We're still working on that. It is something where I don't think it's going to be like the PREP plan that WestPass and so many other groups have actually done so well in training people on. We need to actually sort of morph this and see if it can be used for the performing arts community. Arts Ready, the tool for performing arts preparedness. That is a tool that has been around for a bit of time. South Arts, who is the parent organization for Arts Ready, wants to make some changes in the project. The other project that many of you might be familiar with is the Northeast Document Conservation Center's D-Plan tool, which is sort of a fill-in-the-blanks type of disaster planning tool that's out there. And D-Plan has been around for now probably 12, maybe 15 years as well, and it is ready for some enhancements. So we're looking at the idea of, can there be enhancements made to both of these so they both can be applicable to both types of parts of the arts and culture field? And is there any possibility, and we're seeing that we think there may be some, for the tools to work together and provide some accelerated and enhanced help to the community? And the last thing that we're trying to do, and it really is an idea that has come from the insurance industry, is something called a loss of income calculator. If you have this many seats and a disaster cancels this many performances, what kind of loss of income do you have? Is this a need for, going to show a need for insurance? Is it going to show a need for disaster planning, for the idea of a plan B or a backup site to hold your performance? So those are some things we're thinking of for tools. And then I mentioned the Circuit Rider program. This is going to be a person who is going to be able to provide local training. They're going to go around to 25 to 30 organizations in their area and help them develop disaster plans that are tailored to that individual organization. If there is a disaster in the area, they're going to be able to provide assistance when those happen. And so we've got two organizations that are starting actually in July with these projects. The first one is in Northeast Ohio in the Cleveland area, ICA Art Conservation, and it used to be the Inter-Museum Conservation Association, but has now changed their name. ICA Art Conservation is going to be the host group for one of the circuit riders, and in New Jersey, the State Council for the Arts is going to be a host group for a circuit rider who's going to cover the whole state. So that's going to be somebody who's going to put a lot of mileage on their car. We've got those two locations. These are based on some very successful operations that are going on in Massachusetts. If you haven't heard about this, my friend and colleague Rachel Onuff, who is in Massachusetts, has put together a circuit riding program to look at preservation and archival practices for city governments, townships, and other organizations as well. So she does sort of circuit riding around the Commonwealth to help them develop those plans. And as of next month, in fact, I think as early as next week, she's going to be doing this in Vermont as well. And she is going to be able to show us the blueprint of what she does and give us some training on what's happening there. So this bottom point that I would like you to be especially cognizant about is that there's an opportunity for 4 circuit rider programs from July of 2018 to June of 2019. And I'm hoping that those of you who are on the webinar and those of you who are in the room, if you feel that there might be a need because of the density of performing arts groups in your city, in your region, that it might be something that you could look at for the circuit rider program. So I'll talk about that in just a few minutes as well. And then the last area, but one that is quite important as well, is that we are going to be providing subgrants. We're going to be providing grants from the original grant that we got. So we're going to be looking at enhancing existing disaster networks. We have 10 to 12 grants that we're going to give out on a level of $7,500 each to groups like Culture Aid, to groups like the Alliance for Response, to make sure that their programming is able to be inclusive of the performing arts, to make sure that their membership, their communications is able to be inclusive of the performing arts. So we're really pleased about doing that. And at the meeting that Jeannie was talking about at ALA Midwinter, it was kind of amazing because we had 6 or 7 cities or areas that said, we want to do one of those grants, and get your guidelines out right now. The guidelines, unfortunately, will not be out until July or August, but we are hoping to actually go through the whole process and be able to award those in December of this year or January of next year to some of these existing disaster networks. We're developing 2 new disaster networks. In some cases, they can take the models that are out there, like the Alliance for Response or other groups, and they will be able to utilize funding, $15,000 each for 2 organizations, to start the whole infrastructure of planning, to put together what we call the initial forum that Alliance for Response groups have, where they really have a full day conference on emergency preparedness and cultural heritage in a city or county or region. And so there are a number of groups who are looking at this as well. We've had inquiries from New Orleans and the New Orleans area, and inquiries from some of the cities in northern New Mexico potentially getting together to do some activities this way. And then finally, we have individual institution disaster planning assistance. That is being able to provide consulting and expertise to help these institutions build their own plans. When they said, we don't have the expertise on staff, when they said we don't have the time or the staff, can we bring in people from the field to assist them in developing these plans? Can we provide them some training? Can we get them to training that is beyond our program, but might be bringing in things like active shooter training or other types of activities that they need to know about? And can we help them get some of the tools, and this is the actual equipment type tools, or it can be some of the planning tools that are out there, and help them utilize those for their organizations as well. So we're going to have up to 40 of those grants, around $7,250 each. And so again, we are looking forward to getting the guidelines for these programs out there as soon as possible. So where can libraries help? Where can you all help? These are the areas where I'd really like you to be thinking as you go away from this presentation. Can you identify performing arts organizations in your community that need assistance, could utilize some of the information that is out there, could utilize the education topics that we talked about, and use some of the planning grants? Can you identify cities, states, or regions that have that density of performing arts organizations that some cities have? Where I've worked in New Jersey, worked in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, where we have two very well-known performing arts communities within just blocks of each other, 2, 4, 6 of them. Is there another area with that kind of density for the Round 2 Circuit Rider programs? And can your organization, could the Library of Congress, could another organization that's represented here today think about co-hosting one of these types of groups in the future as well? Workshop and conference presentations, I know that some of you teach about and talk about conservation and preservation and disaster preparedness all the time. We would be very interested in working with you if you feel that you have information that would be of help to the performing arts community that could become part of some of the workshops that we've been talking about. Consider expanding the disaster networks in your area, or are there metropolitan areas that need a disaster network? And then collaborating with performing arts groups on those community recovery efforts during emergencies and disasters. Get introduced to them now. Do the business card trading now. Go to their theater now to find out how you and they can work together as community shelters, as those havens for people to work with and meet at during disasters. And promoting the program in your community starting now as well. So that is actually the extent of my presentation. I did think of one thing as I was preparing to talk about this. Some of you might ask, why is an organization that has worked for years and years in its many forms, Solinet, Palanet, Nelanet, and other networks that got together in 2009 to form LYRASIS, why is this organization that's worked with libraries and archives and more recently with museums starting to work with the performing arts? You know, how did that come about? And really what we're looking at is trying to do whole community type of disaster preparedness and recovery. The idea of working with all of the arts and culture organizations within a community to help them set up networks, but to help them recover and help them continue to be open for the members of the community that are out there who might need to do research at a library, archive, or a museum, or who might need to actually take a break from the recovery that they're going through if their house has been damaged and see what's going on with the performing arts. We want to make sure that we're trying to cover as much of the arts and culture provider community with some basic level of disaster preparedness and recovery information as possible. So that's where our organization that has a long history, starting out as Solinet, publishing, being on site and working with other organizations in disaster preparedness, has decided to move forward with these wonderful 9 other partners that we're working with to mount this program. So we are in the very early days of this program. We are still sort of chugging along, getting a lot of the parts of the program started up. I think that especially by this fall, you'll be hearing about the grants coming out. You'll be hearing about some of the things that the circuit riders are doing. With the turn of the calendar in 2018, you'll hear more about what enhancements are happening with the disaster preparedness and recovery tools. And so please keep a watch out on this program. And one of the things that I thought was great was we had a terrible time kicking around names for this program. And some of the acronyms just didn't work out. We were trying to figure out, you know, what we could call the program. And the performing arts readiness, having the performing arts community be ready for disasters is good, but it presents a nice play on words. What we are doing with the workshops and allowing people to develop plans and have some level of grants and support for their plans is we are performing arts readiness. So with that, I wanted to see if there are any questions or any other feedback that you might have about the program so far. Thank you. Jeannie.
So Tom, you maybe said this and I didn't catch it. What is the length of time for this program? Is it?
It's 3 years.
It's 3 years.
Yes,
okay.
It's a 3-year grant from the Mellon Foundation that we have. So we are actually with some of the individual institution grants, we're hoping to offer 2 rounds of those, 2 rounds of 20. With the network grants, we'll probably offer the new network grants at the very beginning because there needs to be some build up for those, but we may offer 2 rounds of 5 or 6 of the enhanced network grants as well. Other questions? Yes, Mary.
You said something about maybe you guys got a little bit too eager in developing these programs, and so what did you mean by that?
You know, we saw so many avenues where we wanted to provide assistance, and I think that we were trying to look at how many different components we can provide to people, and we put this together in our grant proposal, and we actually have a great sort of timeline and plan for rolling out these aspects of things. But it has been very interesting for the preservation and conservation organizations that are involved. In some ways, I think we felt like, oh, we've been doing emergency preparedness and disaster response for years and years. This should be something where we can, fit this emergency preparedness disaster plan box with another type of organization, with another level of organization. And I've got to tell you, within the first couple of days of starting to meet with folks from the performing arts organizations, they were like, yeah, we have collections, but we're not as interested in those collections as we're interested in the people. We're interested in the performances. We're interested in the idea of the show must go on. And so we had to really learn a lot of the interests and the driving needs of this area. We had to learn their language as well, learn the organizations that were out there. So it was quite a learning curve. And that it's been relatively steep, but I think that it has been really eye-opening for all of the folks from the preservation and conservation centers who are out there. And the other thing that is great for me that I really love, and I look for this in all the challenges that I take on, and we look for this in a lot of challenges that my organization takes on. This is not something where it's 75% coming from the preservation and conservation community and 25 from the performing arts community. On a daily basis, we might be providing 51% of the knowledge, and then they have 49, and then it flip-flops the next day. And so it is much more of a two-way street than I think any of the organizations expected when we first started out the program. So it really is open arms, and we're having to open our arms very wide to make sure we work with as many aspects of the community as possible and can provide as much programmatic support as possible as well. So I think the learning curve is something that has sort of been, eyes bigger than your stomach type of situation that we've had. But I think it is going well. The research is going well. Andrew.
Yeah, I have a question about, we were talking about some of these organizations have really small numbers of people.
Yes.
And I'm curious a little bit about like what you found, the range of the sizes of, if it was typically less than 3, typically less than 4, and people or 10, what that sweet spot was.
Right.
But also in relation to that, I can see another issue where there may just be, particularly with the smaller institutions, a real problem with continuity of staff.
Yes.
That particularly for what you've described as the non-producing
right.
performers,
right.
where it may turn over very quickly, and I can see that being a particular challenge where there isn't that continuity that you might have in a collecting institution, just because you have a building and it kind of stays there, and even if
right.
people move, the stuff doesn't move.
Right.
In this case, you have that real loss of continuity.
And we do see quite a bit of difference between the organizations that do and don't have a facility. Some of the traveling organizations that might not have a facility do have a much smaller staff and infrastructure of people. And so they have especially said, we need to think about how we can deal with these situations. And we need to think about when we're going into another facility, how to deal with these situations. In some cases, we are working with some of the performing arts centers that are out there. And when I was doing my classes in New Jersey, one of the things that I was most pleased was that sort of the sweet spot in working with many of these organizations is if they have an operations manager, we're golden. If they have an operations manager who knows the building, who knows a lot of the businesses, who knows a lot of the technology and things, that is very helpful. So it is a really wide range, though. We're working with organizations that may have 15 to 20 people on staff, and we really need to look at what can happen from everything to building and community disasters with them to these non-facility organizations that may have 2 or 3 people, may have 1.5 people, like some of those that came to a couple of our focus groups. And what we're suggesting with them is to try to work collaboratively with other performing arts groups, to try to work collaboratively even with other cultural heritage groups who might be able to help. Because that's the same thing we do with some of the smaller museums and historical societies. When I go out and I'm working with a number of states, when they are that small, it's going to be difficult in some cases for them to even get to the building and get into the building. And if there's heavy damage, certainly it's not going to be something that one person can do. So that's important as well. So those are one of the sort of a main area or dividing line that I see for different levels of service that we need to have out there. Yes?
So with the workshops and the individual assistants, are you also reaching out to the emergency managers that are associated with the cities those cultural organizations or
We are.
performing arts organizations are in and connecting them as part of the workshop? Or
Yes,
yeah.
yes. And one of the best locations, I think, because they've had almost 10 years of doing this for the Alliance for Response has been Pittsburgh. They've had a very active Alliance for Response group for years and years. And they are making ties already with the performing arts organizations who themselves have been networking a little bit. And they have people from Allegheny County and their region 13, Emergency Preparedness and Recovery area, that have been part of Alliance for Response, and they're saying now that Alliance for Response may be expanding a bit in the Pittsburgh area to include performing arts organizations. Yes, they certainly want to be there to work with organizations that may have more people than books inside their walls, that may have more people than artworks inside their walls. So we're definitely trying to do that. I think, and I'm going to be really candid here, that the Alliance for Response groups around the country always need to be recruiting and working with emergency managers. I would love to see what I saw in Mississippi when we worked with the Gulf Coast program, and there were more emergency response folks in the room than there were cultural heritage folks in the room at that kickoff meeting. If that could happen at some meetings all over the country, I'd be really happy. So that still remains a key thing for us to do while we're expanding and enhancing these community networks. Jeannie, did you have?
I was going to ask you about mutual aid agreements. Is that what you're developing for these smaller institutions where you want them to work together? Because you've really got to have something formal
Yes.
for that agreement that they agree to.
Yeah, we're working toward that. I can put it that way. I would say areas like San Diego that has had an Alliance for Response group for years and years, where they put together a really good mutual aid compact. Those are some of the models that are out there. Seattle and other cities as well. We are trying in organizations and cities like New Orleans, before they've even started working on an Alliance for Response, there were 5 or 6 organizations there that had been working together on disaster planning, and they have been trying to figure out how to put together a mutual aid network there. So I think that is going to be one of the formal steps. It may not be during this first 3-year grant that we are able to get that far, but I hope it will be, because that definitely is an end goal that we have for the program. Other questions or anything from the webinar participants at all?
One question, which is that to confirm whether LYRASIS is already connected to the heritage Emergency National Task Force?
Yes, we have, I'm a member, and then there are other people who are hoping to get training, and one person who has been attending some of the meetings as well. So yeah, we work with Heritage Emergency National Task Force, and certainly as part of the board of the Foundation for the American Institute for Conservation, I work to make sure that our members, if we have disaster concerns, are plugged into being able to work with NHR. Any other questions? If not, I would say watch this space, watch email to find out about potential grants, watch for some of the community work that's going on out there, and thank you very much for both your attention and your questions today. I really appreciate it.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.